Well, hello, friends. Join me and let's escape from the murder, pillaging, looting, and destruction for just a moment and join our friend, young Jonathan Gullible, on the island of Corumpo. This is chapter 36 of Ken Schoolin's book, The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, a free market odyssey. Chapter 36, The Grand Inquirer. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. George Orwell. The shadows had lengthened in the late afternoon. Jonathan and his two acquaintances, Mary Jane and Doobie, emerged from the alley. Somewhere on the street, Mises rejoined him as they walked to a grassy park. People entered the park from all directions, some on foot and some on knees, and gathered around a hillock in the center. Good, said Mary Jane. We're early. Soon this place will be filled with followers who have come to hear the Grand Inquirer's truth. All your questions will be answered. They sat down on a mound of grass. Doobie, overcome by food and whiskey, promptly fell back and passed out. Mary Jane grew quiet. Families settled under the trees, and all waited expectantly. Jonathan overheard a man behind him say, "Wonderful! I didn't expect the Grand Inquirer today." His companion replied, "Nobody expects the Grand Inquirer, whose elements of proof are." At that instant, a tall, gaunt figure clad completely in black strode rapidly into the middle of the gathering. His eyes slowly swept the faces gazing up at him. The murmuring of the crowd stopped, and all grew silent. The man's hard voice seemed to rise from the very ground and penetrate Jonathan's whole body. "Peace is war. Wisdom is ignorance. Freedom is slavery." Jonathan glanced around at the silent, awestruck crowd. The Grand Inquirer had mesmerized his audience, but young Jonathan blurted, "Why do you say freedom is slavery?" Stunned by Jonathan's brashness, Mary Jane chided him in a whisper. "I said you'll have your questions answered. I didn't say you could ask him questions." The Grand Inquirer fixed a piercing look on his young examiner. No one before had ever had the nerve to challenge him. The light rustle of wind in the leaves made the only sound in that park. Then the Grand Inquirer growled, half at Jonathan, half at the crowd. "Freedom is the greatest of all burdens that mankind can bear." Roaring at the top of his voice, the man raised his arms and crossed his wrists high above his head. "Freedom is the heaviest of chains." "Why?" persisted Jonathan, finally feeling the courage of an outsider who doesn't worry much about what others might think of him. The Grand Inquirer moved directly in front of Jonathan and spoke gravely. "Freedom is a monumental weight on the shoulders of men and women because it requires the use of mind and will." With a roar of pain and horror, the Grand Inquirer warned, "Free will would make you all fully responsible for your own actions." The crowd shuddered at his words. Some clapped their hands over their ears in fright. "What do you mean, responsible?" asked Jonathan in an unwavering voice. The Inquirer retreated a step, and his face softened in a kindly expression. He reached down to pluck a sprig growing near his foot. "My beloved brothers and sisters, you may not realize the dangers of which I speak. Close your eyes and imagine the life of this tiny plant." His voice grew soft and caressed the crowd. Everyone except Jonathan pressed his or her eyes tightly closed and concentrated. Hypnotically, the Grand Inquirer began to describe a picture to the assembly. "This little plant is but a frail bit of shrubbery, rooted in soil and fixed upon the earth. It is not responsible for its actions. All of its actions are preset. Ah, the bliss of a shrub. Now, beloved, imagine an animal, a cute, busy little mouse scurrying to find its food among the plants. This furry creature is not responsible for its actions. All that a mouse does is predetermined by nature. Ah, nature. Happy animal. Neither plant nor animal suffers any burden of the will because neither faces choice. They can never be wrong." A few in the crowd murmured, "Yes, Grand Inquirer, yes, yes, so it is." This charismatic leader straightened, suddenly taller, and continued, "Open your eyes and look around you. A human being, one who succumbs to values and choices, can be wrong. I tell you, wrong values and choices can hurt you and others. Even the knowledge of choice will cause suffering. That suffering is responsibility." The people shuddered and huddled close together. A boy seated next to Jonathan cried out suddenly, "Oh, please, Master, how can we avoid this fate?" "Tell us how to rid ourselves of this terrible burden," pleaded another. "It will not be easy, but together we can conquer this terrifying threat." Then he spoke in a voice so soft that Jonathan had to lean forward to catch his words. "Trust me, I will make the decisions for you. You are then relieved of all the guilt and responsibility that freedom brings. As decision maker, I will take all the suffering upon myself." Then the inquirer flung his arms high and shouted, "Now go forth, every one of you, comb the streets and alleys, knock on every door, get out the vote as I have instructed you. Victory is at hand for me, your decision maker on the Council of Lords." And the crowd shouted their approval, rose as one, and scrambled away in all directions. They pushed and shoved, eager to be the first to hit the streets. Only Jonathan and the Grand Inquirer were left, and Doobie gently snoring in the grass. Jonathan sat in disbelief. He watched the mad dash of the group, then he peered at the face of the man in black. The inquirer looked past Jonathan as if seeing some distant vision. Jonathan broke the eerie silence with one more question. "What virtue is there in turning all decisions over to you?" "None," replied the inquirer with a contemptuous sneer. "Virtue can only exist if there is freedom of choice. My flock prefers serenity to virtue. As for you, little one with too many questions, what do you prefer? Let me make your choices too. Then your questions won't matter." Speechless, Jonathan walked away from the empty park. The Grand Inquirer's laughter rang out behind him. And that is the end of chapter 36, The Grand Inquirer. An ominous chapter for ominous times. Well, tomorrow I will read from chapter 37, Loser Law. And we are swiftly approaching the end of our story. Wonder how it'll turn out. Well, have a nice night, everybody. Try to, anyway.